Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video about all the bands that I have seen the most. I have a spreadsheet of all the bands I've seen and an Access database. I'm that kind of a person. So I went through and looked at all the bands that I have seen in order of how many times I've seen them. And I thought I'd talk about the bands I've seen 7 or more times, which is 9 different bands or artists. So grab yourself a coffee or a tea or a glass of wine. Actually, you're probably going to need the whole bottle. And let's talk about gigs. So I'll start with the bands that I've seen 7 times, and actually it's one band and one solo artist, and it's Dandy Warhols and David Bowie. And it's really quite nice that I've seen them both the same amount of times, because actually 5 of those gigs for Dandy Warhols and for David Bowie were the same gig. Dandy Warhols supported David Bowie on his reality tour in 2003, and I went to 5 shows on that tour in November of that year. So let's talk about Dandy Warhols first. They're a kind of unusual band for me. I tend not to listen to so many American bands, but Dandy Warhols I think have a kind of British sensibility about them. They have a little bit of a shoegazy sound. They have some glam, trashy, stomping pop tracks, so I really like them. But I've seen them 7 times, and all 7 of those gigs were in 2003, so I'm long overdue seeing them again. And they are touring next year, and I'm very tempted to go. But yeah, my first Dandy Warhols gig was in May of 2003 at the Brixton Academy. Then I had the 5 shows where they supported David Bowie in November, and then I saw them finally in December 2003. What I thought I'd do with all my bands is kind of talk about when I first saw them, when I last saw them, and also pick out a highlight gig. So for Dandy Warhols, that last gig, all the Bowie supporting gigs, my memories are kind of subsumed into the Bowie gig that followed. But for Dandy Warhols, that last gig that I saw them way back in December 2003, almost 15 years ago, that one stands out because it was sort of like a big celebration at the end of the Bowie tour, but it was also like the beginning of Christmas. It was the 2nd of December, so it was just a really big fun night, and they did a cover of Little Drummer Boy with the stage covered in red and green lights, and it was just a really lovely kind of beginning to Christmas. So that's Dandy Warhols, who I've seen 7 times, and now we get on to David Bowie, who I also saw 7 times. And yeah, I wish it was 70, I wish it was 700. What can I say? There can never be enough David Bowie gigs, but I'm really grateful for all the ones I did manage to get to. So my first Bowie gig was after 15 years of being a Bowie fan. I finally got to see him live in September 2003, and that was a fan club gig. It was from his online fan club BowieNet, which I was a member of. You could put your name into this kind of raffle and win a chance to see him debut his new album Reality at the BBC studios in Hammersmith, Riverside Studios, and I happened to win a ticket and I got to go, and that was my first time ever seeing David Bowie, and seeing him there in this tiny kind of venue. I think there's only 300 or so people got to go to that show, and it was beamed around the world into cinemas. Jonathan Ross was there doing a Q&A with him. It was just a really incredible night and an incredible like introduction to seeing my all-time hero and god of the universe, basically, live in the flesh. And then obviously I went to those 5 gigs on the main reality tour where the Dandy Warhols were supporting, and those were amazing. I'll talk a little bit about them in a moment. But then my 7th and final David Bowie gig was at the Isle of Wight Festival in 2004, which was also wonderful. Obviously at the time I didn't know that would be my last ever Bowie gig, but I think it was not too soon after that he had his heart attack and stopped touring and making music for quite a long time. So yeah, but the standout gig, I mean, they were all Bowie gigs, they were all standout gigs, but the one I will talk about is I think it was the 2nd night in Birmingham. So on the 5 dates on the main reality tour, I went to 1 in Manchester, 2 in Birmingham, 2 in London. The second Birmingham night, I got right up close and I was wigging out. I was dancing, screaming, grinning my head off. And I was the only one really sort of in my vicinity who was really, really going a bit mental. And for a few moments at the beginning of Heroes, I realised that David Bowie was looking right at me, smiling back at me, and for those few moments singing Heroes just to me. And, you know, that's the kind of moment, you can die happy after that, can't you? You know, being smiled at by a god. So, yeah, that, you know, stays in my memory really, really strongly. So, yeah, I brought tour programs. I was going to show you some pictures from tour programs. This is the reality tour program, which you can sort of just see. It says Bowie there, and then there's pictures of him inside. It's just pictures. I prefer tour programs that have like sort of articles and interviews and stuff, but it's pictures of Bowie, so you can't go wrong with that. Anyway, moving swiftly along to the artist that I have seen 8 times, and that is Placebo and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. So Placebo I first saw in May of 1997, and I saw them twice in a row in May 97, and those were quite eventful and interesting gigs, and they're all on my blog. I write about all the gigs I've ever been to on my blog, and I'm up to October 1997, so I've got a long way to go. But I also write about my current gigs that I go to. So there's 2018 gigs and there's 1990s gigs on my blog at the moment. My last Placebo gig, it was actually 2004. I haven't seen them for a long time. I was going to see them 2 years ago. 2016 they did like a greatest hits tour, and I did have a ticket to go see them at Wembley, but as is so often the case, I was ill and I missed that gig, so I still need to catch up on seeing Placebo live. But yeah, so I saw them between 1997 and 2004. Currently I need to kind of update my Placebo gigography, but my stand-up Placebo gig was in May, I think, of 2003. And it stood out to me because for some reason Brian Molko just looked incredibly hot that night, and I was right down the front, very, very close, and I just, you know, remember staring at the majesty of this incredibly gorgeous man. I mean, he's always looked attractive, but something in 2003 he just went into stratospherically hot, and so that was memorable. The music was great too, obviously, but you know, you remember these things. Moving swiftly on to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Nick Cave's also very, very attractive. But I've seen them 8 times, and I've got a program here. This is from the 2001 tour, which was the first time I saw them in London. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds are one of only 2 bands on this list who I've seen both in Australia and in London. So Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds were actually at my first ever gig, and first ever proper gig in January 1993 when I went to the Big Day Out Festival in Perth. And let's just get my hair sorted out here. The Big Day Out Festival in Perth, and they were on that bill, and they were just incredible. So they were my first of like the bands that I actually sort of followed that I got to see live. I didn't really follow them so much then. I had one of their singles, which was the Ship Song. I'm careful with that one. But I didn't really start buying their albums till quite a bit later in 1998. And then the first time I saw them in London was this tour in 2001. But I last saw them in 2017. It was, yeah, last year, September last year, when and they toured arenas, and I saw them at the O2. I must admit, I don't think the O2 really suited them for me. I remember thinking I would rather this be in a theatre like the Hammersmith Apollo, and in fact the standout gig I will mention was the Hammersmith Apollo in June 2003. They did 3 nights, a Friday, Saturday and Sunday at the Hammersmith Apollo, and I had booked the Friday night. I went that and was so blown away that I went straight to Star Green box office the next day and said, have you got any more tickets for Nick Cave for the Saturday and Sunday? And I got a ticket for the Sunday night. And that night, And the Friday night, the crowd had been a little bit static and had only sort of got up and moved down the front because it was a seated gig towards the end. But on the Sunday night, everyone just leapt up and went straight down, you know, weaving past the hapless security people to get down the front. And so I spent most of that gig. I had my seat was way at the back, but I managed to get right down almost to the front. And it was just incredible. It was up there with my best ever gigs. I just remember being blown away by the brilliance of every single song, and just, you know, I ended up sort of crammed in between the first and second rows of seats and like risking life and limb, bruised, and, you know, potentially could have my legs snapping in two if anyone had surged onto me. But there was nowhere on earth I would rather have been that moment, as, you know, as they were going through classics like Tupelo and Diana and the Ship Song and all those songs. It was just an incredible, incredible night. So those are my bands that I've seen 8 times. 9 times is Super Furry Animals, which is kind of interesting because I've only actually ever seen them, I think, 3 times as a headliner, but they've supported the Manic Street Preachers so much and they've been on festival bills so much that I've ended up seeing them 9 times. And they are a band that I love, but they're never one that I've sort of obsessed over or put up posters or something, but they're just always there, comfortingly brilliant, always. And I first saw them in December 1996, which was my first Manics gig in London, my first gig in London. You know, 2 weeks into London they were there, so, you know, they're a very special part of my memories of that early time because of that. And then I most recently saw them in December 2016 when they toured their first 2 albums. They played Fuzzy Logic and Radiator in full, and that is the standout gig for me that I want to mention, partly because Radiator in particular is an album that just totally soundtracked 1997 for me. Radiator by Super Furry Animals and Attack of the Grey Lantern by Manson, those were the 2 albums that just really, really take me back to 1997. But apart from that, it was the day after I'd had my PhD Viva, and I'd actually been to a gig the day of my PhD Viva as well. I had my Viva in the afternoon, passed, drank a lot of champagne with my supervisor, raced home, got changed, raced back up to North London to see Kula Shaker at the Kentish Town Forum. But I've only seen Kula Shaker 6 times, so that's why they didn't make this video. But that was a great night, but it wasn't really until the next day that it had properly sunk in that I'd pretty much finished my PhD. I just had some corrections to do, and then it was all done, and so I was ready to party, ready to celebrate, and it was a brilliant gig, and I was just in the best mood that night as well. It was a pretty special day. So yeah, that's Super Furry Animals, the band I've seen 9 times. And now the bands that I've seen 10 times, so that makes them my 3rd most seen bands, and they are Suede and Manson. Now, up until just about a week ago, I had only seen Suede 9 times, and so they were joint with Super Furry Animals, but now they have crept up into 3rd place to be joint with Manson at 10 gigs. So I've seen Suede 10 times. First time I saw them was in 1997. This is the programme I picked up at that gig. That gig's on my blog as well. I think I saw them 3 times in 97, and all those gigs are on my blog. That was a fan club gig, April 97, and it was all B-sides. So it was a really, really incredible night. Although, to be honest, for my first Suede gig, I would have been happy whatever they played, because it was just so great to finally see them live. It was 5 years I'd been a fan at that point, so, you know, it was just wonderful to finally get to see them. And then my most recent Suede gig was a week ago. It was 13th of October at Hammersmith Apollo, and it was incredible. That is my standout Suede gig. That is the best I've ever seen them, and they're always brilliant. But just phenomenal. They put other bands to shame. I have to say, they really do put other bands of, you know, the same era to shame, because they are unchanged. They are completely unchanged from when I first saw them in 1997 to now. They have the same energy, the same just intensity to their performance, the same sort of need to be loved and to perform live as they always did. I wrote about it again. My review of this gig is on my blog, and I'll link everything down below. And they have such a back catalogue, and they make use of their back catalogue. This is another thing that I think other bands could learn from Suede. They really make use of the back catalogue. Every gig they play has a different set list, so you never know what's coming next. It's never predictable, and they can just throw out classic after classic. Everything is such a joy when you hear songs from the 90s like Trash, like Killing of a Flash Boy, We Are the Pigs, wonderful, amazing songs that just evoke so many memories. But also their new songs are so brilliant as well. Songs like Cold Hands from the new album, it's just a magnificent stomper live, and it was just a joy from start to finish. I can't recommend Suede any higher. I can't recommend them highly enough is what I'm trying to say. As a live band, just go and see them. I don't think there's any better live band in the world today. Not that I've seen every single band, but they're definitely the best live band as far as guitar music goes that I have seen this year and in recent years. But then let's move on to the other band that I've seen 10 times, which is Manson. And up until earlier this year, they were actually my second most seen band. Then they moved down to third, and now they're joint third. And because they've split up, they're just going to keep moving down my most seen ranks, unfortunately. But, I mean, much as I've just, wallowed in how brilliant Suede are live, they're still nothing compared to what Manson were. Manson were the best live band I ever saw. I saw them first in April 1997 as well. I first saw Suede and I first saw Manson. But whereas for Suede, that Suede gig in April 97 was me finally getting to see a band I'd loved for 5 years. Manson were still quite a new band. I'd only known them for less than a year. I'd only been a fan for a few months since I bought the album, their debut album. And they blew me away on that gig. They absolutely blew me away. And I saw them 10 times over the next few years. The last Manson gig I saw was February 2001, and then they split up in May 2003. But yeah, almost every single Manson gig could be a standout, but the one that I will mention is that first gig because it just totally blew me away. I struggle for words when I try to talk about what Manson were like live. They were transformative, transporting, just the most incredible rock and roll experience. And yeah, that night was like a religious conversion for me. I went in a casual fan. I came out with my life changed. They were my new favourite band. Sort of crushed in the top place along with Manic Street Preachers. And but that gig is on my blog, and I think it can best be described by, my hysterical scribblings in my diary when I got home that night, and that's all in my blog post about that gig, so I'll link that down below. But yeah, as I said, up until very recently, they were my second most seen band, but another band just clambered into second place in July of this year, and that is the Pet Shop Boys. And I have a lot of Pet Shop Boys programs. Let me see if I can go through them in chronological order. My first ever Pet Shop Boys gig was in November 1994, and that was in Australia on the Discovery Tour. I then saw them at the Savoy in June 1997. I saw them at the Nightlife Tour. I saw them at a bunch of other tours. This is the Super Tour. And then there's plenty of other gigs which I haven't got programs for, but most recently I saw them at the Inner Sanctum show at the Royal Opera House, and that is the standout gig. At the moment, I am really struggling in my mind as to which was my top gig of the year, and I've still got more gigs to go to, but Suede at Hammersmith Apollo or the Royal Opera House. The second night I went to at the Royal Opera House, they did 4 gigs. They did 4 consecutive nights, and I went to 2. I went to the opening night, and I had a front row of the balcony seat, and that was perfect because I had such an amazing view. But on the closing night, I was in the orchestra pit, and that was incredible because they cleared out the whole orchestra pit. Obviously there wasn't an orchestra for Pet Shop Boys, and they made that a dance floor, but they didn't fill it to it wasn't as crammed full of people as it would be at a normal venue. There was plenty of space to dance, and to be so close to the Pet Shop Boys and you know, to be able to see everything so clearly on stage, but also to have that space to dance and move around. It felt like the most incredible privilege of any sort of gig experience. It was one of my all-time best gig experiences, and they're just incredible. You know, Pet Shop Boys, they're where music began for me. They were the band that made me a fan of music, and just in awe of how brilliant they still are now in their 60s, still making brilliant pop music. And that was a hugely joyous and emotional night, just being so close to the band and having such a wonderful time. So yeah, that's I think that is just edging over Suede. As I said, Suede are the best live band in the world in terms of guitar bands, but electronic music might just have my heart and soul a little bit more. I don't know. I'll do a roundup at the end of the year, obviously, of all my best gigs, and we'll see who won. Maybe it'll be a gig I'm yet to go to. Let's see. But we've got to move on now to my number one most seen band. And it's the Manic Street Preachers. Of course it's the Manic Street Preachers. And we have a little bit of a jump, because my second most seen band, Pet Shop Boys, I've seen them 11 times. Manic Street Preachers, 34 times. 34 times. I have to say though, if Manson hadn't split up, I'm sure they would be up there with a similar amount of gigs. It's only because I've been seeing the Manics for so many years and they haven't split up, they've kept on touring, that I've seen them so many times. But yeah, so let's have a little jaunt through some of the tour programs. The earliest one I have is, this is just a thing that just says Truth, which is from their 1998 tour, but obviously the first time I saw them was December 96, which I've already mentioned, because I saw the Super Furry Animals that night as well. But then 1998 for the Truth tour, there's the Manic Millennium, which was of course Millennium Eve. There's the Forever Delayed tour, which was a greatest hits tour in 2002, and that was incredible. And this is the Lifeblood tour. This is a crappy program. It's just, that's the only picture of the band where they're covering their faces, and then it's just blood spatters on every single other page. I'm just like, that's a crappy thing. But Lifeblood is possibly my absolute favourite era of the Manics, so, you know, I still, you know, treasure this, even though they really swindled their fans with this bloody awful program. But what am I criticising the Manics for? I've seen them 34 times. Well, yeah, I guess if I've seen them 34 times, I know which bits are good and which are bad. And the one gig, so many gigs stand out, but the one that I will mention is the Manic Millennium, because it was just the perfect way to end the 20th century and begin the 21st. You know, I'd had a bit of a difficult time in December 99. I'd had some personal issues within my social life. And it was so great. I went on my own to Cardiff, my first trip to Cardiff, and it's one of my absolute favourite places in the world now. And it was just a really great break. I had a bit of money to spend, so I stayed in a posh hotel, and I just wandered around Cardiff I spent about 5 days there, and just had a really wonderful time. And the pinnacle of it, of course, was the gig. And yeah, just to be there, I think it just felt like, you know, the culmination of everything that I'd lived through for the 90s, basically. Being a music fan in Australia, being so far away and not being able to go to the gigs that I wanted to, and then for everything to have changed so much, to be in, well, I was a Londoner, but, you know, to be able to go to Cardiff and be at this, you know, historic gig and see the Manics, you know, there was no one I wanted to spend the Millennium with more than the Manic Street Preachers. And it was just an incredible night. And, you know, they played a bit before midnight, and then they cut to the screens, they cut to like the Millennium celebrations around the world, and then the sort of countdown and Big Ben's chimes in London, and then everyone, you know, Happy New Year, and everyone cheered and confetti and stuff, and the Manics came back on. And so the first song I heard in the Millennium was the Manic Street Preachers singing Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. And yeah, it was just a wonderful, glorious celebration, and I'm so glad I got to be there. And that is my most seen bands, my 9 most seen bands, the bands I've seen 7 times or more. And like I said, it's a bit of a long video, so if you've made it through, thank you very much for watching, and please do comment down below and tell me about your most seen bands. I'm sure there's people out there who've seen their favourite bands way more times than I've seen the Manics. Have you seen a band 100 times, 200 times? Let me know. And let's chat about live gigs and what you love most and which bands you love most seeing live and how many times you've seen them. And yeah, and please do leave a like to this video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe. Have a look at my blog if you want to read about some of these gigs. I'll link them down below. And thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you again in my next video. Bye.